So, elected in the evening, sacked in the morning. What does it take to survive and thrive in Nigeria's fraught political world? Well, just ask Ikenga Ugochinyere, the lawmaker representing Idato North and South in Imo State. Having braved the worst of Nigerian politics, including gun attacks, and still managing to sprint from the margins into the mainstream, it's taken the ruling of an election petitions tribunal to topple him from his perch in the House of Representatives and prevent him from taking part in the supplementary elections ordered by the tribunal. Now he's left weighing up his chances on appeal. But if you know anything about Ikenga Ugochinyere, it is that he fully intends to launch a ferocious fight back against his political opponents, vowing to reclaim his mandate through the courts. But beyond that, he's also seen as a man of the people, and reports suggest that already his sacking has prompted a swell of public support in Idato constituency. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by barrister Gozie Nwachukwu, a lawyer and PDP chieftain in Imo State who supports Ikenga Ugochinyere. And let me just say this before we go over to the barrister, that we had arranged for the barrister to face off against the APC candidate in Imo State who went to the tribunal in opposition to Mr. Ugochинyere's victory. We were told at the very last minute, literally 10 minutes to air, that the man had suffered some kind of emergency and would be unable to attend. But we're glad that we have Barrister Nwachukwu here with us. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Charles.
Clearly you didn't have an emergency.
Of course.
So you're here.
Of course.
How much of a setback is this for the PDP in Imo State?
Well, it's I don't even see it as a setback.
Well, clearly it is.
It's not, because this only goes to highlight the inconsistencies that have been churned out by the courts in matters that have to do with the pre and post elections.
Well, you concede that there are what you call inconsistencies.
Yes.
If those inconsistencies exist and that affects your appeal, then you're not going to take part in the supplementary election. You're basically out in the cold.
Yeah, this Ugochinyere's case is going to be the tiebreaker. This case, I can assure you, will be the tiebreaker, because there must be an end to this seeming inconsistency that has been churned out from our courts. Charles, these tribunals where this judgment emanated from, there are 3 other tribunals handling similar matters with similar issues, and also came out with a completely different conclusion and judgment. Like in the case between Nnamdi Igboekwe versus Emeka Chinedu, that was for the Ayazo, Ezinite Federal Constituency. The court simply followed the law. And what is the law? That pre-election matters can only be ventilated in court, so to say, legally, in terms of locus, by somebody who participated in the primaries. That is what the law is.
Right.
And that is even what the Supreme Court had done in the recent judgment of PDP versus Shettima. And that's also what the Presidential Election Petition Tribunals followed. So I don't know where the tribunal judge or the chairman of the tribunal or the tribunal justices in this particular Ugochinyere case veered off to.
So the argument is that the primary election the PDP held for that Idato North and South constituency did not comply with the provisions of the law. That's yes. Essentially the case, is it?
I saw a lawyer. I saw a lawyer in the morning who came here to make that case. And let me tell you, Charles, it's easy to use scenarios that don't exist clearly in the fine prints of the law to confuse the listening public I want to tell you clearly, Charles. This case against Ugochinyere had already been ventilated up to the Supreme Court. The issue of that primary had been ventilated in George Igbo versus Ikenga Imo Ugochinyere up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court simply said, threw the case out. Threw it out. This same litigants at the tribunal, the APC candidate Abazu, and even the Labour Party candidate, who is the fourth respondent in this Ugochinyere case, Pascal Obi, had also gone to the Federal High Court to also ventilate this issue as regards that primary. And the court simply said, well, no, you don't have locus. You can't talk about this matter because the law is very clear. If you look at section 285 of the Nigerian Constitution, the fourth alteration, it's very clear there that for you to question a primary, A, is that he must have been a candidate, which was also replicated in the Electoral Act 2022, 8414, which said that only an aspirant to a primary could have questioned the issues of the primary. I understand what the lawyer is talking about. He says that if we come to section 132 of the Electoral Act that talks about grounds for maintaining an election petition, A says issues of qualification. But qualification is a term that goes beyond nomination and primary. Qualification also has to deal with your certificates. So what the judge...
But it includes...
It includes certificates, issues that have to do with filings, the certificates you have, your qualifications. It doesn't deal with only nomination.
Yeah, but it includes nomination.
It includes nomination also. So, but when it is nomination, the law is that it is only somebody who participated in that process that can question it. And there's nothing else. Anybody can add to that.
Right. So it sounds like you're confident going into the appeals.
Charles, it will interest you to know that in page 32 of that particular judgment that purportedly removed Ikenga, the judges, because Pascal Obi, the APC, joined Pascal Obi in the Ikenga matter as the fourth respondent. What they tried to do was to disqualify Pascal, disqualify Ikenga, and they'll be left on a home run to now take something with winning only one polling unit out of 340. But you know what the justices said? These same justices, they said clearly in page 32 of that judgment that issues that have to deal with nomination of candidates and primaries are pre-election matters that should not be brought before them. The same justices in page 32. Then in page 33, they somersaulted. They did a thunderbolt somersault and started to discuss issues that they had already ventilated and decided upon in page 32. I don't understand it.
Right. Well, we don't understand it either. But do you think that your candidate, because you talked about them in kind of very, nebulous terms, them trying to do this or that to your candidate. Do you think that your candidate was singled out and the suggestion that the primary that made him the candidate did not comply with the provisions of the law was part of that singling out?
Well, what happened is that, Charles, there's a case.
Right.
There is an Imo case. That is the case of Jerry Alaboso and Tango Dezani versus Right Honorable Ugochinyere, where the Supreme Court said, okay, the primaries that produced Ugochinyere didn't comply with the provisions of the Electoral Act as regards venue.
Right.
Now, these persons now try to bring up that particular decision, and they are relying on it in this Ugochinyere matter. But the issue is that the Ugochinyere matter had also been tried up to the same Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, you guys, Ugochinyere was validly nominated. So our candidate, that judgment is a judgment that shouldn't waste the Court of Appeal 15 minutes to deal with. It shouldn't waste the time of the Court of Appeal. If I were sitting on that panel, the first day that appear before
Well, you're not sitting on the panel.
If I were,
Yeah.
if I were, and I know there are courageous men and women on that panel, they will simply ask them to address them on this singular issue. Section 285, Section 84-14. Simple. Once they address those issues, Ugochinyere, yes, you could say singled out, but the issue is that a miscarriage of justice has been done. And for whatever reason, it is condemnable. It should not be allowed. Let me tell you, Charles, this democracy is almost on a cliffhanger right now. If we're not careful, the judiciary and INEC, mark my words, will truncate this nascent democracy that we longed for a very long time. How can you, a tribunal very lower to the Supreme Court, come to ventilate and reopen a matter that the Supreme Court has concluded upon? It is not done. It's an affront on the Supreme Court. It's an affront on our Constitution. It's an affront on our laws.
I noticed that Ikenga Ugochinyere has made reference to Governor Hope Uzodinma several times in his public utterances as the man behind the attempt to stop him. Do you agree, with him? If so, what's the basis for making that assertion?
Well, I would like to give a background to these particular allegations. I don't know whether you followed what is called the Omuma magic. There's something called the Omuma magic. That was an exposition by Ugochinyere of the appearance or padding of the voters register, especially in the governor's enclave, his hometown, Omuma and Oru East, with the dead persons and non-existent persons. That was exposed by this human rights activist, Ugochinyere. And since that exposition was done, the man has known no peace. The Imo State government has accused him of murder, accused him of terrorism. Till date, no proof, no charges, nothing. So there has been no love lost between both men.
Right. And
the governor of Imo State is the leader of APC in Imo State. And he would want to see, because Ugochinyere is now the Director General of the campaign, governorship campaign of the PDP in Imo State, which makes the stakes a little bit higher. So the governor has an interest, should have an interest in seeing that Ugochinyere suffers some discomfort so that he wouldn't concentrate. As I speak to you, Ugochinyere is supposed to have been back for the flag off of the campaigns and for the movement of the campaign, but he can't be back because he has to be talking to his lawyers. So whatever the governor can do to discomfit this young man, I think the governor will want to do that. But the question now becomes, you can do whatever you want to do, but the law is the law.
Right. Now, the tribunal ordered a supplementary election rerun in 55 polling units, from what I understand. Tell us what happened in those polling units and why an election rerun has been ordered. Was that due to violence and insecurity in those areas? If so, to what extent does that affect the legitimacy of whoever won the election?
Well, Charles, the issue is that those polling units, I also had the lawyer that appeared in one of your programs in the morning, say that he doesn't know what happened, they were disenfranchised, materials couldn't get there. Charles, it is of public knowledge that some local governments in Imo State, human beings barely exist there right now. I'm talking about Oru East, where the governor comes from. I'm talking about Olu local government. There's a place called Olu North in Olu local government that has 7 wards. There's barely life there. In the whole of Osu local government, there's barely life there. In Okigwe, in areas like Amoro, Ihube, these areas. So the issue of insecurity in Imo State is a known fact. I believe that it was due to insecurity that most of these electoral officials or electoral materials were not able to get to those places.
Right.
Now they talked about PVCs collected and voters that were disenfranchised and all that. Now it brings me to this question, Charles. Are you aware that in some areas like Ohapo in Oru East, Ihube and Amoro in Okigwe, 4 wards in Okigwe local government in the senatorial election, that was held the same day Ugochunyere's own was held. A certain candidate lost in 5 out of the 6 local governments in that senatorial district. But suddenly scored 39,000 and above votes from 4 wards in 1 local government. Charles, let me tell you something. The insecurity in Imo State, to some extent, is contrived. Some persons, during the last election, have benefited in the electoral process by the reason of that insecurity. In places like Onhapo.
Well, your candidate benefited. I mean, the argument is that people in those other places didn't get the chance to vote, and therefore your candidate came through.
The question now is, were there people there to vote?
Well, I don't know. I'm simply telling you what the arguments are.
There could have been voting there. Charles, didn't you see how Ugochinyere was nearly killed and his uncle was killed? Most people there are living on the edge. Didn't you see the local government chairman that was beheaded? Is it in that place where people are being beheaded and their heads being used for sport? Is that where voting will take place? What happened was that INEC declared that result on the basis of voting that took place on that day. What was possible, which is why our campaign now, we are challenging INEC. We're challenging INEC, we're interfacing with them. And we are telling them that in those areas where it is impossible to hold elections, Charles, you can't enforce an impossibility. We need to be fair to ourselves. Asking people to hold the elections in some of those areas is like suicide. That's what happened. So our candidate didn't benefit from it in any way because he didn't do anything outward.
Yeah, but now that
he was voted by the places where elections were able to take place.
But now that the tribunal has ordered supplementary elections to be held in those places, what do you reckon is going to happen?
Well, I can also tell you that on appeal, that judgment will be thrown out.
Right.
And then but without conceding, let's just, for the purposes of argument or presentation tonight, if there are supplementary, I want you to also understand, do you know Ugochinyere won that election without being physically present?
Yes.
Let me tell you something. One of the most unpopular characters in politics in Nigeria, locally in his area, is that person that calls himself the governor of Imo State. Ugochinyere, if I wish Hope will be on that ballot to run against Ugochinyere, he will be thoroughly beaten. Because you know why? The young man has touched lives. The young man brought in a brand new kind of politics that is youth and women centered. First of all, if they want elections to hold there, I hope the chief of army staff that has been priding himself and saying sit-at-homes have ended in the southeast. Oh, good news. But he has to relocate to those 52 polling units if he wants elections to hold. 2, the commissioner of police in Imo State that has thoroughly failed in handling security in Imo State. That is the same man that did the magic that nearly brought the woman in Adamawa State to power against the incumbent governor. The man is in Imo now. Should that man be anywhere near the police force? Those are the kind of people that you can't guarantee security with. So if they want elections to hold in those areas, number 1, the military has to relocate to the place. Now, displaced persons who have left those areas because of this insecurity have to also to return, because the election is not about ballot boxes or environments. It's about human beings. Somebody has to thumbprint. Not like if you go to places like Umpere, for instance. I have a result here I want to show you. There's a result I have here. Charles, do you know that in a place called Onusa in Umpere, an election held there during the state assembly election? Do you know what happened? Magic. Our agent Uzodinma collected the agent copy of that election, the result. This is it. This is the agent copy of that result. This is his name, Uzodinma. This is it. Now, this is the copy that was presented by APC at the tribunal. And this is the copy you have on the IREV. On the IREV. What is in this copy is totally different from what was collected at the point of voting. How do we substantiate that, Charles? Our Uzodinma, our own agent, has a signature that you can verify from UBA and other places where he banks, and even his name. Look at his signature here. Is it anything like what they signed on this APC copy that is on the IREF?
Well, to be honest, I can't authenticate any of those documents that you've got there. So, I mean, I understand the point you're making, and some other politicians have made the same kinds of points. But in total fairness, I can't verify this.
Yes, Charles. Do you know why I'm giving you these papers? I'm leaving them with you. I'm a lawyer. I swore to an oath to defend the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I want to stake my wig and my gown tonight. I also have a copy of what is on the IREF. Go to the IREF and type Onusa, Kasala Hall. That's all. You see, I'm leaving it with you. You will see that what is on the IREF is not what is on the agent's copy. And you know what it is? Do you know that the secret codes on these result sheets also reappeared on the one APC presented? We now begin to ask, who gave them these codes? How were these papers printed? Do we really have elections? Did we have elections in Imo State? And this goes to also raise concerns about the governorship election that is coming up in November. What is INEC going to do about this? Are we also going to have another Onusa magic where result sheets emanate from places and persons that shouldn't have it? Charles, well, this country has to move forward.
Beyond being a lawyer and a PDP chieftain, you actually ran for primaries yourself.
Yes.
And you went to court.
Yes.
So you were questioning your own party.
Yes.
So it's a bit of a muddle, isn't it?
Well, what happened was that I went to the primaries. And after the primaries finished, I felt there were issues. And what I did was that, there's what we call the supremacy of the party. The national secretary of the party and now the governorship candidate of the PDP in Imo State called a truce. He called us and said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. He asked us to bury the hatchet. And I also looked at the issues. What I was asking for would have stopped my party from having a candidate in that election. That would have been very harsh on them, though it was the law, but well, that would have been terrible. So the National Secretary, distinguished Senator Samuel Anyanwu, graciously intervened. And reason came, and I saw reason, and I had to bury the hatchet.
Right, so we've got a couple of minutes left before we have to go. You've, Ikenga, Ugochinyere, and the PDP have gone to the appeals court.
Yes.
I know you've talked generally about this, but what are the specific things that you're asking the appeals court to do?
First of all, there's what is called res judicata. It's a legal principle. What it simply means in lay terms is that when a matter has been decided, same issues decided by a court, the persons don't go back to reopen it again in same court. What has happened is that Abazu, the candidate of the APC, had ventilated, and Pascal Obi of the Labour Party had already ventilated this issue before the Federal High Court. And the court said Ugochinyere was validly nominated. What we will be simply asking the Court of Appeal is, number one, that the principle of res judicata, which is an age-long principle of law, has to come to bear now, and that the courts have to apply it. Two, that the principle of precedence of the decisions of higher courts, superior courts or lower courts, also has to be respected by these courts. That the Court of Appeal should please, in its wisdom, look at what it had decided already in PDP versus Shetima, which the Supreme Court concurred with, and please bring it to bear on this Ugochinyere case and save us from this legal quagmire.
Right. Well, I mean, if people heard me spluttering there, I've got a bit of a cold, so I apologize if there were funny noises coming out in the background. But I want to thank you very much indeed for your very articulate presentation there. Barrister Gozie Nwachukwu is a lawyer and PDP chieftain in Imo State who supports Ikenga Ugochinyere. And I also have to point out that we expected the APC candidate in that election to be here. He was supposed to be here, but 10 minutes before air, we got a message that he had an emergency. So I hope everything is all right with him.